Hey guys, it's Matt here, coming at you with another episode of Matt Rants. Now, sadly, this Matt Rants is not going to be a fun one. I want to do more fun ones, like Q&As and some other fun stuff, but it seems like we keep on having some really sad issues to talk about, some very thought-provoking issues to talk about, which, I love them, but they're mostly current event stuff, and I want to talk about the current event stuff, right? I want to rant about some of that, but I also want to talk about some other stuff, like, maybe some stuff like, oh, hey, why are retro video game prices so big or something like, or rather so large, so high is another good term. Why should I get into retro game collecting, stuff like that? So if you guys want to ask me stuff like that, then you can comment below. You can go over to our Patreon, which I'll mention a little bit later on in the video, and so I would definitely love to rant about some of that stuff as well. Before that, though, I want to give you guys a little tiny little update. Last week when I did a Matt Rants, I said, hey, might have some videos next week, although I might also be a little bit out of commission because I had another 2-day tournament, because I work behind the scenes at a local New York City speech and debate, well, in this case, debate tournament, debate league. And so sometimes I'll be at the tournament, sometimes I won't. Sometimes tournaments will be just a Saturday. But since we're nearing the end of the year, these are 2-day tournaments. So I get completely knocked out. I miss, sometimes I don't miss a Saturday, Sunday release. I know our podcasts on those guys on the radio were going strong, but also that was reposting some older content that I had ready so much. I had it ready on our Blog Talk Radio account, but not on our Those Guys on the Radio YouTube channel. So that, I think those were pretty smooth. But in terms of our Those Guys Play stuff and our TG production stuff, those were a little bit lacking, and I totally get that. So we're going to try to come back with a bit of a vengeance since there aren't any more speech and debate tournaments until next month. So right now I'm going to try to come back with a bit more of a vengeance in terms of the release schedule. But right now let's just talk about the topic of this episode, topic of the day, I guess, topic of the last 2 weeks, really. But in this case, though, I've kind of shifted it, not just about rest in peace ToysRUs, not just about ToysRUs dying. It's actually, I wanted to raise the question, did Millennials kill ToysRUs? Did Millennials kill ToysRUs? So that, to me, is a very interesting question because, not just, I personally, I don't know if I fall so much into the camp of saying that Millennials did, and that's only because the question that's being asked here is, when you say, did Millennials kill it, if you're trying to imply that it's not only Millennials, if Millennials are part of it, then sure, I think we can maybe take some of the blame. But if you're trying to market it as, or trying to frame it as only Millennials, nothing else killed it, well, we're going to have an interesting episode of Matt Rants for you, because if you think that, then you're wrong. You're wrong for, frankly, a lot of reasons, actually. If you're thinking only, if you're thinking some of it is to blame on Millennials, sure. And you know what? We'll talk about that a little bit. Again, this is a Matt Rants. It's kind of what we do here. So let's talk about, before we even get to the why Millennials, let's talk a little bit about what else, right? What else am I looking at here that is the cause of this? Some stuff that you might think easily, like, oh, of course that's why. Some other stuff that you might not think about. So the first thing is, of course, the rise of online shopping. Right? And it's not even just eBay anymore, although eBay is actually really dang good, but it's not just eBay, right? It's eBay, it's Amazon, it's a bunch of other little mom and pop stores that now have online websites that, if you want to support your local mom and pop shop, but somewhat local, maybe like, in your small state, but, or even in your bigger state that you can't really drive to, but you want to support them, then you'd buy that instead of going to buy it at your local ToysRUs or your local store in general. But let's say, let's say you go, no, but I want to support ToysRUs. I love ToysRUs. I really want to support them. Right. So it's, so you're not going to go to your mom and pop either stores or websites. You're not going to go to eBay, but then you take a look at Amazon and you look at Amazon and Amazon says, hey, are you sure you don't want to come to us? Are you really sure? Because that toy or that item, whatever it is over at ToysRUs, that's $45. Isn't that a lot of money? That's a lot of money. Are you sure? And by the way, if you're wondering whose voice it is, it's not the Amazon Echo. I forgot it's not her voice. It's actually Bezos, the actual CEO. It's just kind of talking to you. I think it's Jeff Bezos. It's just like, come on, man. Do you really want to go spend $45? Because you could, if you have Amazon Prime, just spend something like $29.99 with free shipping, and it can be 2-day. So you don't leave your house. You end up getting your item in 2 days. And unless it's an item that you're really nervous about. But here's the funny thing, too. Let's say it literally is for a toy. Let's say a specific figure, a special figure, some kind of figure that isn't really meant to be played with. It's meant more for display. So something like a Figuarts or I think Kai is the name I'm thinking of. A lot of different brands. Our very own Anthony San Andres would probably be scolding me right now, giving me all the different toy brands. Because he's a collector. He also does different kinds of like paint jobs and stuff. I can't think of the exact term right now. But the point is that he would yell at me because he's a millennial who's actually buying toys, and some of them from Toys R Us. What? But that's a little bit later. So anyway, so you sit there and you're like, wait, I can get this in 2 days. And even if you're wondering about the quality, this isn't eBay here where you're thinking, oh God, is this coming from Hong Kong? Is this not coming from Japan? Or is this not coming from a place that deals with Japan? You know, if it's a fake, and by the way, I would imagine that you wouldn't be getting your Super Sentai or Kamen Rider toys at Toys R Us anyway, but still, if you're nervous about the quality of your product, you might not go on eBay, right? You might be like, oh, there might be some fakes there or something like that, you know, fake Funko Pop, stuff like that. But you're not going to get your fake Funko Pops off of Amazon. Now, if anyone has any stories about that, please comment below in the comment section. But unless you're going for third party and maybe you don't know that third party, if you're going directly from Amazon's, you know, it's the immediate, oh, this is new, this is, you know, $10.99, $11.99, and you're getting it with that whole, you know, free Amazon Prime with free shipping or over $25 for shipping, whatever that might be. If you're doing that, then I would say that you're not going to have to deal with fakes, right? So basically you're getting what is seeming to be a quality product for cheaper without having to leave your house. Now, why is that important to some people? Well, it's kind of funny. For some of us who are in New York or some other large urban areas, if you have something like an unlimited Metro card, I don't know what the equivalent would be in other places in the US, but you have an unlimited Metro card, being from New York, I know like that's how that would work. If you pay a certain amount per month and you get free swipes. So if I'm going to what used to be my local Toys R Us, the one that Tristan and I actually went to, that one sadly closed, but we went to it we did a little vlog with the for the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. You can see that on this channel as well. It was really kind of funny. We staked out there for a few hours. We got there at like 5:45 a.m. and we just stood online for the next few hours trying to wait to get one, and we documented our events, so that was kind of funny, and that was kind of fun. But the point is that sadly that one closed regardless, so I have to go to another one that hasn't closed yet, because that one was announced in the first set of like the first list of all of these are closing right now, and sadly that was on the list. But the point though is that if I want to go to that one, right, I can just take the train, and it's actually a 5-minute train ride. But if I'm in an area of the U.S. where trains aren't that, even at a place like Long Island, right, Long Island, where I used to live, I went to high school for a few years. That's where I met, you know, some of the people that have come on this channel, like Tristan Walter, Anthony Toto, and many more, right, many more that have and will come on this channel. The point is that, you know, there you need a car. Right? So when you think about going to Toys R Us or some other brick and mortar store, you kind of have to think about gas a little bit, right? You have to think, wait, not just gas, but also time. But even more importantly, I know like your time can be very important, of course. But even more important than that, I would argue, is gas money, right? That money that you're spending. And what if you go to that brick and mortar store and they don't have it? What if they don't have the item that you need either at the store or even on their website? And that's one thing I have to mention. I haven't really gone on Toys R Us's website, but I've noticed something very, 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 very problematic with a lot of big chain retail stores. Their websites are pretty bad. Right? I mean, when you look at Amazon, it looks like they're just sitting back and they're going, no, you know, Amazon has a pretty good website. eBay, I really like the way eBay's set up, but you know, you have these multinational corporations, these rather large chain corporations going, who cares about the website? Who's gonna really use the website? Why should we make it optimized for mobile phones? And it's just kind of like, where do you think it reminds me of Scrubs with JD. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Scrubs. If you know the scene I'm talking about with JD, where he looks over at Dr. Cox and he says, where do you think we are? Right? It's just, what year do you think we're in? Right? So for me, it's the idea that if you are a business is trying to compete with the likes of Amazon, which sadly, no matter what, whether or not you're brick and mortar or you have a personal website, you kind of are, right? If you are in a position where you are a Toys R Us or a Walmart or something like that, you have to do something to try and compete. So looking at our first point right there, just the fact that you're going head to head with Amazon, Amazon is the reason, one of the reasons that Toys R Us is not doing so hot nowadays. But now here's the thing though, it's not just, issue number one, Amazon. Now we move on to issue number two, and it's the idea that you need to step up your game, Toys R Us. Like, you're not a mom and pop store. Like, I'm sure some of you, if you're listening to the channel, you've gone to our eBay, which is ebay.com/USR/ThoseGuysRadio. You've gone there and you've seen a few games, few retro games. You're thinking, nah, I don't know. It's, how are the prices looking, right? And you have to think, like, okay, this is me personally, Matt Marrero, sending it out of his home. I'm trying to give you good prices, but it's also at the same time me thinking, like, oh no, this is going to the post office. How hard are they going to fuck me? Right? How hard is the post office going to be like, just bend over, we'll take it slow? No, you won't, post office. It's not going to be fun. So the idea that the post office is not my friend, they're not treating me too well, and I have to deal with them every time I send something out. Where you have a lot of these, bigger corporations that the post office to them, they're best friends, right? It's okay. They've been doing this for so long. They know how to do this and that, and and they have this tax write-off and this other write-off and this kind of thing here. So they, in dealing with shipping things out, it's a lot different than me shipping things out. So my point there is that when it's Toys R Us versus Amazon, Toys R Us has to step up their game and do something to try and actually go up against, because no matter what, you're technically going up against Amazon. So you have to try to hit them where it hurts. So despite the fact that Best Buy isn't doing the best either, and that wasn't even some like funny Best Buy pun thing, it's just the truth. Well, Best Buy isn't doing the best. Yes, sure, they got rid of their CDs, but who isn't nowadays? I love physical media, but I understand that people just aren't buying the CDs that are in, these different stores. So yeah, sadly, people aren't buying the CDs. Best Buy is getting rid of the CDs. Best Buy's anime section is shrinking, but again, what brick and mortar stores anime section isn't shrinking unless it's just a store dedicated to anime or the nerd stuff that we enjoy. So their anime section is shrinking, their CD section is shrinking. But you know what, here's something very interesting if you guys don't know this, and this isn't like a Best Buy plug because I don't really use them, but Satish Ram does. It's just Satish Ram, another podcaster, let's player that's come on the channel, and done a lot of different stuff with us since the very beginning. Actually love Satish Ram, want you back, Satish. Hope you're listening to this, we love you. He's very busy with work, i.e. not this. So, I love you, Satish. He he had both a coupon for Best Buy, and also starting off, he wanted to become a member of their, I think it was like their rewards program, or whatever program they have. And immediately becoming a member of that program for a game that he wanted, a $60 PS4 game, they brought it down. I forgot how much they immediately brought it down. Right, so immediately we're like, oh, we're going to bring this down for you. And not only that, but we're going to bring it even lower because of your coupon. So they double dipped there and bringing the price lower. So I'm pretty sure it was a $60 game that ended up actually being $20. And because it was either he was a new member or something happened with it where it worked out where he said, and he told me that free shipping was also available as well. So he was able to get a $60 game, brand new at the time, and this was just over the last calendar year, from all the way down from $60 to $20. Now, another thing that they do is, and I don't know what other stores do this as well, if you know some other ones, then, comment below, but I know that Best Buy also price matches with Amazon. Now, not with eBay, because that's fucking fluctuating, all the time, right? But they do look at Amazon and they say, if you can find this item, well, it's funny, Best Buy doesn't say it, but if you're savvy enough to know, then they'll do it. So that's the thing right there, right? If Toys R Us did that, and if they do, by the way, or if they did, then tell me that below, because as far as I know, they didn't do that. But Best Buy did do that. And frankly, it's something you need to do nowadays. You need to be able to say, look, it might be a little bit of a loss for us, right? Look, I'm not a big fan of loss leaders, right? I'm not a big fan of Amazon doing what it did, or Walmart for that matter, right? Putting mom and pop stores out of business in a certain area. Then if your Walmart's gone, then you don't have any jobs. Great job, guys. Thanks for fucking up that local economy. But, and it's not just a Walmart. It could be any store that, comes in as a loss leader, taking out mom and pops. But My point here is that specifically is that, I'm not a big fan of the loss leader thing, but if you're a corporation going up against another corporation, you gotta try to do some loss leader shit and try to keep yourselves in business. You have to try. And Toys R Us didn't try. Toys R Us looked at the competition that said $30, free shipping, 2 days. And Toys R Us, it felt like I don't know who they is, maybe just Jeffrey in a suit, just said, no, you know what, I think it works. I think $45 versus their 30, free shipping, 2 days, don't have to leave your house. You know what? You might have a very busy life. You might work 5 days a week, and then the other 2 days a week you have kids who you would think you would take to Toys R Us, but that's a whole different thing altogether. We might talk about that a little bit later as another reason why Toys R Us didn't do so well. But the thing is you work 5 days a week, maybe 4 days a week even, and you sit there and you're like, well, I can get the item in 2 days. And if you have a significant other who, is at home, or if their work schedule sets up so that they can actually be home for packages, then yeah, they can just get get the package that comes in. Boom. Now you have whatever toy or item that you wanted that you could have gotten at Toys R Us for cheaper without even leaving your house. Without sitting back and going, ooh, is the thing that I want even at Toys R Us? Because frankly, as far as I know, I don't think there was any real good way of finding out, unless you got some fucking flyer in the mail, what is going on with Toys R Us, like what items are at Toys R Us. You had to kind of look that up online through other means, and if you were already doing that much research to go, what is the best option, what is the best price for something, unless it was a Toys R Us exclusive, you could probably find it somewhere else cheaper. And that's the big thing right there for me. So not even just number one in terms of they're going up against Amazon because Amazon exists or other online shopping exists. Then you got number two with, well, yeah, you have to try to do something to be better, but you don't. And then here we are, right? So that's number two. Number three is the fact that yes. Okay. So here's something interesting, right? There have been a lot of studies done recently that have shown that kids are actually playing with toys even less than they used to. Now, I don't necessarily agree. Like, I don't like that personally, because I do think that even though I would have some kind of gaming device, maybe not mobile, but some kind of gaming device for my kid to help kind of, just different, I can't think of the exact words right now, but spatial awareness, right? Kind of trying to develop that. The same things that some people would say, how about that little slugger throws a baseball? I'd be like, or they could just play on the Wii. I'm sure everyone will agree with that. But still, I'm sure all the parents will be like, yeah, sure, whatever, kid. But whatever, man. But at the same time, we might actually be going towards that kind of future, right? Where, not that I'm trying to discourage outside play, but at the same time, we do have to acknowledge that people are going, or rather kids are getting their mental stimuli from things that are a bit more digital. It doesn't exactly mean that they can't create, right? It's not like we can't give them the Labo, or we can't give them like Super Mario Maker, or even something as like RPG Maker, right? And just have them have fun and have them create. They can still create and they still have an imagination, but the idea is that they're not using physical representations to do that. I mean, even something like Skylanders or Amiibo, you don't play with the Amiibo. You put them on the thing. By the way, I totally know how Amiibos and the Skylanders work. And Disney Infinity. You put them on the thing, and then it reads them, and then you're still playing a game regardless. So you're not actually playing with the Amiibos the way you used to play with toys. I mean, I remember I had a bunch of Dragon Ball Z toys, and I would have a bunch of like what-if situations that I would play out in my head with these toys when I was very, very young. And I will tell people that it was when I was very, very young, and I'm not going to tell you the exact age that I stopped, because that's embarrassing. But the point is that I still, even to this day, I still think about what ifs. It's just no toys, right? I mean, I have figures, funnily enough, from when I was a kid, but I actually don't play with them or move them around. But the point is that that's what we used to do. And in some cases, that's not happening nowadays. Again, a bunch of studies are saying that it's happening less and less. So, and I would also imagine that it's a bit easier, and you can also lose track of it if you are buying something for your kid on mobile, right? If you're buying more continues on something like Candy Crush, or you're buying $5 apps, it might be a bit more tolerable to you. Studies have shown that even though we dislike microtransactions a lot, and I say we, I don't know who we is. I know I don't. A lot of you, I think, listening to this channel might not. Some of you might like microtransactions, and that's cool. But the point is that when it comes to microtransactions, studies have been showing that it's a lot easier to tell someone, hey, buy virtual currency to then have to buy this, or just put in $5 or $5 in whatever currency you use, and you'll kind of just be tricked in a way into saying, oh, I didn't spend that much, actually spend more money doing that, rather than buying a kid a toy that, I gotta be honest, even though I love the toys that I had, I remember a lot of people that I knew every Christmas or every just birthday or some event where they got a toy, they would be happy with the toy, and then after a bit they would just kind of forget that it existed. And sometimes it would be like this kind of like toy renaissance, this toy-naissance where you're walking through your house and you're a kid and you're like, oh, this toy, and then you'd be into it again for a little bit, but then you'd forget about it again, right? And the same could arguably be said with apps and other kinds of video games. Yes, the same could technically be said. I'm not saying that I don't have family that did the same thing with with video games either. But what I am saying, though, is that it might just be easier for parents, either they think it's easier or they get tricked, to gulp down $5 mini purchases here and there versus spending, $60. I mean, I was watching the news the other day, and they were talking about new toys coming out. And there was a really cool Ninja Turtles toy, to be fair. I think it was like the actual their base with I don't think it was the sewers. It felt like it was something like April O'Neil's apartment complex, although it might have been the sewer. And it had the Ninja Turtles there with April. It was really small. It wasn't Legos or it wasn't Mega Bloks. I forgot what company it was, and it looked pretty cool. But then the price of just, and it's $100. I had to sit back and think, if I had kids, they would lose a chunk of that, and I would be pretty upset. Right? I would not be a fan of it at all. So, it's just the idea of, okay, so, kids are not only playing less, but then you also have to think, is my kid going to appreciate this? Do I have the money to spend on them constantly? And I say constantly because, again, maybe with some people with video games, even if we think of the $60 games, you might have a household where a mom and a dad and a child play games, right? Or use the PS4 or Xbox One or Switch in some way or another. So it might seem like, well, sure, we're paying $60 for this game, maybe one a week or two a month, but it's not just for the kid, it's also for the husband or for the wife or, for someone else in the household who isn't just the child that's playing the game. Right? So even with video games, it's a bit different. And also, obviously, we all know, different between saying, even though someone's imagination is technically limitless, it's a little bit different saying, oh, here's a toy for the kid that they could lose, they could get dirty, they could break, versus a game, which of course the disc can be snapped in half. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that just because you can break a disc doesn't mean that when you get that disc in, when you start playing that game, you can't play that game for hours and hours and hours on end. Versus a toy, which, if you forget about the toy, if you stop caring about the toy, if it stops being useful for you, well, then that's more space in your house, especially if it's a giant freaking play set, right? Like, as much as I loved and still do love, I still have some of my old Megazords that I had from when I was a kid. I have to think, if I, kept on collecting Megazords, or if I had a kid who I kept on buying Megazords for, there would be a lot of Megazords in our house versus just buying a newer Power Rangers game, which there are some newer Power Rangers games, or just buying a Super Sentai game as well, and being able to experience that rather than just, and a new Power Rangers game, there's some that are $30, I think, on the 3DS. There's a newer one that's digital only, I thought. That was, I think, for the PS4, Xbox One. Not sure for the Switch. That one was, I think, $20. So spending $20 there, spending, $30 here or there, buying an older retro Power Rangers game for, less than 60, hopefully, less than 60. It just makes more sense to do that and then have longer playtime rather than just buying toys. Now, again, I would probably buy toys for my kids. I don't want to sit there and not buy, toys for my potential future little ones. I don't have kids yet, and I'm okay with that. But my point is that you have them playing less, and then you have to think, is it worth it, to buy these toys for them? And then that leads to point number 3, which I'm not going to get into too much. I don't want to get into different politics and different, taxes and stuff like that because, or, just basically money and in general and economics because it's not what this channel is about. But when it comes down to, oh, well, why are they not buying this? Well, it does matter when, certain prices of things are going up. And I mean that across the board, no matter what you're looking at. Prices are going up and wages aren't. Right. And I'm not trying to sit here. We're not trying to get into this whole thing about oh, well, it's, minimum wage workers. What are you talking about? And we shouldn't be raising this. We should be lowering this. And I'm not trying to get into that. Right. I'm just trying to get into the fact that everything's rising. Price of everything is rising up. But what's not rising up is the cash that can be used to buy these toys. So you have people thinking even more frugally than they used to. Right? You have people thinking even more frugally than they used to, and now you have these situations where you do have to have you have a dual income house, right? So you have two parents, they're giving money towards landlord, if they're mortgage, whatever it might be. Food, right? People need to eat. I know toys are awesome, but you can't eat them. And frankly, if you're a collector, you don't want to eat them. So you're sitting there and you're like, as a parent, you're like, okay, I got to pay things that keep us in this house, right? Because if you don't have a house, you can have toys, but not many. So you need to have a house, you need to have an apartment, whatever it might be. And if you have kids, then you also need to feed them, clothe them, get them ready for school and stuff like that, right? In terms of back to school stuff and all that stuff like that. So you sit there and you're like, okay, it's a lot easier for us to buy them a video game than to buy them $100 or even a $30 or $40 toy, right? It's a lot easier to do that than to do that. Game versus toy. So it's not just about money in general. It's not just about kids not playing as much. It's also then comes down to, do we actually have the money to do it? Are we living paycheck to paycheck? Maybe there can be a study done where people who aren't living paycheck to paycheck do have the ability to buy toys, and they still are. Although it looks like that isn't the case because in general, toy sales are down across the board. It's not just ToysRUs. But that would be a very interesting study, right? People who can actually, which it might sound silly. It's like, well, people who have, it's like, well, if people can't afford it, then of course they're not going to buy it. But it still is the idea of, are you then going to have people who can't afford it at the time save up just to buy their kid a really expensive toy? Now, that doesn't exactly mean that 20 years ago, every single human being in the US had the ability, or every single parent had the ability to buy toys. No, not necessarily. But I would argue that looking at some of the recent trends, like in fidget spinners, they're very, very, very inexpensive, both to make and to purchase. Like, I'm sure there's some very expensive fidget spinners, and it's kind of like, guys, please don't. But I'm sure there's some expensive fidget spinners. But when I look at fidget spinners as a whole and how they caught on, they were definitely very, very, very low budget. Right? Where we didn't look at fidget spinners and think, oh man, gotta get that fidget spinner $100 set with the fidget spinner play set. Like, there was even companies that try to capitalize on it, like Power Rangers and other companies. They didn't sell them for so much money that it was crazy to try to buy a fidget spinner for your kid. So when we look at fidget spinners, as some kind of like the new toy that kind of swept the nation last year, the idea to me is, I'm sure it's still popular. I'm sure people still and kids still play with them, but I don't really see them anymore. I feel like that just kind of died down for the general public, at least talking about it. But when it came to something like fidget spinners, they were so inexpensive that I do think that cost also plays a factor. Not just the cost versus Amazon, but costs in general. And moving on to another point that I wanted to bring up is the fact that, and this is one that you might not actually know much about, but there was a company that bought out ToysRUs a few years back called, it was Bain Capital. And right here in the politics here, it's not about the fact that like Mitt Romney owns it. It doesn't matter who owned it, right? It could be freaking Bernie Sanders who owns it, right? What matters is that Bain Capital, somehow the way the deal worked, there was a lot of debt that ToysRUs ended up having to pick up the slack for. So there was so much debt that ToysRUs had to pick up, and then they still had to pay Bain Capital as their owner, right? And they had to pay other firms as well that I don't really know how they ended up being part of the deal. But the point is that when you have different masters to serve, like Bain Capital, like your debt that you have, and also having to pay other firms as well, maybe that whole, all of that made it so that they couldn't bring the prices down of their toys. But guess what? It's still a reason why you're failing. right? Sorry to say it, guys, but if you can't make something affordable when you're a multi-million dollar corporation, when you can't make something affordable and you can't assure that you can price match with other companies or that you can do something to try to bring in the younger crowds. And I say younger as in not like myself at 25. I mean, even littler, right? You can't try to bring in the parents to bring them in. When you can't do that, it's not going to work, right? Toys R Us needed to do something to change, and due to Bain Capital owning them, they couldn't do that, right? They couldn't restructure, they couldn't change some of their business plans and ideas, do things to try to appeal to the young people. They couldn't do something to do that, which in my opinion is definitely one of the things that ended kind of had them rolling down this hill, right? This, you want to call it a snowball, you want to call it one of those rocks from Crash Bandicoot, just rolling at you. And sadly, Toys R Us was Crash Bandicoot, and they didn't make the jump, guys. They did not make the jump. They got crushed. And it's sad, right? Because I do really enjoy Toys R Us. There's still some more reasons, but I'm just saying in general, I really did enjoy Toys R Us. But there's also one thing I do have to mention, though, right? Because we're not at us just yet. We're not at just, oh, it's all of our faults. But there's one thing I want to mention, though, before we even get to that. It's actually the fact that millennials are actually buying toys. Now, this might be completely anecdotal, to be fair. I've just seen this online a lot. I know, people like Anthony Sanandris, who I mentioned earlier, who does do this. Millennials do buy toys. Now, not the toys that you think of, right? Not so much toys that can move, or you think like, oh, hey, I can push the back and then its head will flip and it'll turn into a different character. Or, this one has these accessories and stuff like that. No, more so the idea of posable figurines, or just in general, just figurines that, the high-end stuff, right? Like statues and busts. So millennials are buying those. So it's kind of funny when we look at the reason why I brought up Bain Capital too, not just because I was going to anyway, but we actually had Toys R Us, and the reason why I wanted to bring up millennials in this is because Toys R Us actually called out millennials and said that millennials not having more kids is the reason why Toys R Us, or one of the reasons why Toys R Us went under. And it's so funny because, again, I'll get to the reasons why millennials did actually affect it in just a few moments. But talking about the fact that millennials actually bought toys. Now, sure, they didn't buy kids. But again, when you look at other studies, we see that kids aren't really buying toys anyway. And still, while there is a baby section in Toys R Us, when you look at the general scaling of like what a millennial is, if you're talking about people in their 30s, okay, I guess, right? But I'm 25 years old. When should I have had a kid who could have then been old enough to buy some of the toys that are in Toys R Us, right? Like, should I have had one 5 years ago at 20? Should I have just said, you know what? I don't need to go to college. I'll just have a kid. Should I have done it 4 years ago? When should I have had my kid, right? That could have been old enough to tell me, Dad, I want to get this at Toys R Us. And I would have said, well, okay, I mean, when you give a kid allowance to be like, well, how much do you have saved up, son? Like, I mean, again, if you're saying that, because sadly, it's very hard to tell what people, when they say millennials, what they're referring to, because in my opinion, someone a few years younger than me doesn't really have much in common with someone in their early to mid 30s. So I don't really know what the word millennial even means anymore, especially because people are saying that, oh, these teenagers eating these Tide Pods, they're millennials. It's like, actually, no, they're, what is it, Gen Xers? I forgot what the exact term is, but they're not actually, it's like the Z generation, Millennial Z, but they're not actually millennials. So you're not, that's a whole different issue that we're not getting into right now, but they're not millennials. So the point is that, and again, should they be having kids? Like, I don't think we should be looking at an 18-year-old being like, you have to have a kid because in 5 years from now, he or she or they need to be a Toys R Us kid. We can't just sit here and not have people buying, toys. Like, that's just the weirdest. Like, I understand when like the government is saying like, make more babies, like it's, like wartime efforts and stuff like that. Like, I get it when it's the government, but I don't think I want Jeffrey poking his head into my bedroom saying, you fucking? Like, I don't think I'm a big fan of that, really. And I don't remember how Jeffrey sounded. That sounded very much like King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph, which is a podcast that we're actually... Oh, by the time this is out, it's actually not out yet. Shit, I just spoiled that. But it's coming out soon on our Those Guys on the Radio YouTube channel. But still, the point is that, yeah, I don't know if I want Jeffrey in my bedroom. At least, I just don't want Jeffrey in my bedroom. Let's not make this weird. I don't want him there. So, let's keep him out, right? Let's keep hashtag Jeffrey out of my bedroom. Hashtag Toys R Us bedroom. Hashtag not having a Toys R Us kid. I don't know, too many hashtags. But the point is that it's just, you can blame millennials. I'm not saying you can't. I'm about to in a second, right? But I don't think that we need to have Toys R Us saying, look, I understand why Toys R Us is not going to blame Bain Capital. You don't do that, right? You just don't do that. They're dad, right? They could easily restructure them. You can't blame dad, especially if Toys R Us wants to live on in some other form in the future. But you know who you also shouldn't piss off? Millennials. Because guess what, everybody? I don't know if you know this. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, right? And I don't mean to make this even darker than it already is. But I have to just point this out to you guys if you don't know. People die. And it's really sad. It really is. Like, I'm not saying that I enjoy it. I don't revel in it. It's sad. People die. But one day, these millennials are going to have kids, actually, if they're not now, apparently, allegedly. So if they're not having kids now, they're going to one day. And when they do, they're going to look up, hey, Toys R Us is coming back. I remember Toys R Us. Let's look into this. And if they didn't see this story already, they're going to see it later. So maybe, just fucking maybe, you don't blame your parent company. I totally get that, right? They can't blame Bain Capital. But maybe don't blame your future consumer base, because I honestly don't see, unless Toys R Us is going to restructure to sell model trains, I don't see in the next 5 to 10 years 60 to 80-year-olds going, I'm going to go shop at the Toys R Us. I got to get a new train for I'm the conductor. Like, no. You're not going to get that. You're going to have them trying to sell fucking fidget spinners 10 years after being relevant, 5 years after being relevant. And they're going to be trying to sell them where millennials are just a quick Google search away. All you have to do is just a quick Google search. And then, look at that. Why, look at that. Toys R Us shit on us. Man, we're going to love the shop there. We're going to love shopping there. And speaking of shopping, right, I keep on having new points before I get to the final, crucifixion of millennials. Before we get to that last point, I want to mention also this idea of reseller culture. And because it's not even just about the Amazons now I'm bringing it back to eBay, what I mentioned, in the first, the idea of online shopping in general, but it's the reseller culture, because it's the idea that even though I don't like scalpers, I'm not a big fan of scalping. I mean, I kind of like you, I guess, if you're a scalper, you don't have to be like Satan, right? But I don't like the idea of scalping, right? So, but guess what? Scalping exists. So yes, you might have, people buying stuff, especially if it's like a Toys R Us exclusive. They might be buying it from Toys R Us. They might be, buying it out from there and then reselling it online. They could. But if something isn't a Toys R Us exclusive, and Toys R Us isn't doing their hardest to blast the information out that, hey, we have this item. I mean, there are Super Nintendo classics that are sitting in Toys R Us's, and yet you still have people bidding high. Not as high as people did for the NES Classic Edition, but you still have people bidding higher than $80 on eBay. And it's just so odd. And it's not even just not even just Toys R Us's, by the way. You can go to a Target and you can try and get one. It is so strange that people, and look, if you're an agoraphobe, I understand, and it's okay, right? I get you. It's cool. I have those tendencies sometimes as well, that I just don't want to leave my house. I just want to curl up and, into a ball and just, well, if I'm recording, then at least I'm getting something done. But, just kind of collapse into myself. So I do get that, right, guys? If you can't leave your house. But for some of you that are actually buying these on eBay, and I'm not saying that you're millennials, but you are part of the reseller culture, right? You're part of the reseller. You're part of that circle of life that really works well with retro video games, because unless it's a mom and pop retro video game store, who else are you going to buy it from? GameStop? Ha! So you're not going to buy it off GameStop. So where else are you going to go for it, right? So I understand, you're kind of getting, and technically even going to a mom and pop store, you're part of the reseller culture. And so that's why I'm not trying to put down resellers, or even, I mean, I can put down scalpers all fucking day. But I don't know if I'm going to put you down for, put you down for buying something from a scalper. I don't know if I'll do that, but I'll put down scalpers any fucking time of the day. I have no problem doing that. So, but the point is that they exist, right? So, and you'll have people online thinking, oh, there's no other alternative. I have to get this here. When it's like, no, the local Toys-R-Us might still have it. I don't know why I'm doing that in slow motion. But still, they might still have it. But you don't look at you don't look at your local Toys-R-Us. You don't even care to check. And frankly, that's not necessarily on you. That's on Toys-R-Us. But I've already blamed Toys-R-Us enough for not giving enough info out, or kind of keeping people in that loop of like, hey, we still have some. But I will admit though, they did keep people in the loop when it came to Super Nintendo Classic Edition, making sure to tell everyone we're not having pre-orders, show up to get some. But I don't know, maybe they're not giving people enough info now to be like, hey guys, we still have them though. You should still get some though. But anyway, when I look at, so those are my reasons thus far, right? This last one being the idea that having these resellers and these scalpers, it might take away from some of Toys-R-Us's business if there are those that don't know you can still get it at Toys-R-Us, or if they truly do sell out at Toys-R-Us. And then here's the thing too, right? You might think, but wait a minute, if they sell out at Toys-R-Us, then Toys-R-Us might want to make more if there's demand for more, which is true. But then some people might just go, all right, I just won't get it. Who cares? I guess I just won't get it. Or they end up looking on eBay or other websites and they just pay the scalper prices and then they move on with their lives, right? And they feel like they've been satisfied. And then Toys-R-Us doesn't really know too much, doesn't know how to get in the middle of that. And then they just don't restock, right, any of that material. And then everyone who says, oh man, I wish we had that, well, Toys-R-Us doesn't have it anymore, right? Or they didn't notice in time, like, oh, hey, wait a minute, we could have actually bought more of these. So resellers and scalpers, and I hate to put them both in the same pool because it's not really, not really the same, but still, both are also, I think, part of why we have this whole culture that kind of shut down, Toys-R-Us, right? Just same thing with, mobile phones and how that plays into account as well. This idea of us being a lot more eagle-eyed. But again, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, didn't bring up mobile phones, but other than the whole playing games, but it still makes sense. So I don't have to really get into its own topic, right? Or into its own issue, like its own reason. But looking at the last reason, the one that we've been building up to this entire rant, Millennials. Is they bad? Do we now? Here's the thing, right, guys? I don't want to sit there and just be like, all these millennials, because I feel like millennial bashing has just become something that people just kind of, rub their chest to and just kind of breathe heavily to and just think, yes, just bash them a little bit more. And I don't feel comfortable with that, not just because I'm a millennial, but it's not just because of my own bias, but it's also the fact that I just don't like bashing one whole group of people. Like, if you're going to make a joke, okay, right? You call it a joke. I don't know, probably won't do well, but if you call it a joke, okay. But when you're seriously trying to say, no, millennials are killing these industries. Do they have the money to kill them? Like, we can get into all that, a different time. But it's just the idea that in this case, it's like, oh, millennials killed this industry because they didn't have kids. Why is Jeffrey looking to see if I'm having kids? Like, dude, seriously, get out of the, my wife's giving birth. Get out of the fucking hospital room, okay? I'm sure you have some other shit to do. So why do I still have to say that millennials are partly to blame? Well, here's the thing, right? And I feel like I don't know if this is something that, I don't know what started this culture, right? I don't know what started this idea. And maybe it's not even only a millennial thing, but obviously millennials do share in it. This idea that even though millennials know that things can change and have seen things change, it still feels like there are these ideas, this idea that like, oh, whatever this example that I'm using is, in this case, Toys-R-Us, it will always stay the same. It will never change. It will always stay the same. And then you ask the person that says that, and again, they could be a millennial. You ask them, you say, oh, have you gone shopping in there? And they're like, no, not since '09. I didn't really go in there till '09. I pre-ordered, a X video game there, and yeah, it was pretty fun. I have my memories. Now, by the way, right, am I part of this culture? Right? Is Matt Marrero calling himself out in talking about this? Kind of, yeah. Right? So in no way am I immune from being part of this culture just because I'm the one talking about it. Thinking back to one of the signs that I knew that Toys R Us might not have been doing too hot was, and this isn't me calling it out. Like, I didn't sit there and be like, I called it out on Twitter in 2010. But a few years back, I forgot how many years back now, there was a huge Toys R Us in Times Square that had to shut down and got replaced with a Target, which I'm cool with Toys R Us shutting down. I'm not cool with the people losing jobs, but you're going to shut it down and replace it with something. It had a fucking, there was a really cool Ferris wheel in there and other really cool attractions in there. It's going to be replaced by a Target, whatever. Is there a shooting range in that Target? Give me something fun. So me kind of sitting there and being like, I got replaced with a Target. That sucks. There were so many cool things in there. But also, ask me what I bought in there. I think once a few friends of mine bought me a Shinken Red from Samurai Sentai Shinkenger. It got adapted into Power Rangers Samurai, right? Shinken Red. They bought me that for my birthday. Oh God, if it was in '09, I'm gonna fucking lose it. No. It was in 2012. Okay, it was in 2012. It was in '09. I was actually gonna fucking lose my shit. No, it was in 2012 that they bought me that. Because it was my birthday. Went to a birthday dinner. I was gonna pay for my own dinner. They said, no, we're gonna do it. I was like, oh shit, really? And then I think it was actually might have been Satish Ram who was like, I want to buy you a gift. And I said, let's go half on this Shinken Red because it was a figure arts that was actually pretty expensive that I've lost some of the parts for. The thing, I've actually said that I blame kids for losing the parts and fucking look at me. But anyway, the point is that it shut down a few years back after 2012. I think it was like 2014. That shut down 2015 maybe, and I sat there and I was like, ooh, that's not too good. But then I realized, well, they don't charge admission for the Ferris wheel. They didn't really charge admission to get in at all because it was meant, you obviously have to buy toys there, but it's also Manhattan, so you're gonna have a certain kind of premium if you're selling something in Manhattan, or because you have a physical store in Manhattan, because that real estate is pretty expensive. So not only is Toys R Us doing poorly because obviously at the time Amazon is just as big as it is now, arguably. I believe it was in the red at the time, but it was still a loss leader. So it was still doing well in the sense that customers enjoyed Amazon in 2012, or this was in 2014 when it 2014, 2015 when the Toys R Us in Times Square was not doing so hot. So you look at it, right? You look at the situation where they can't lower their prices. They have to probably raise them if they're in Times Square. Who is buying shit in Times Square? Maybe tourists. But also another thing too is when I think of their video game section, which wasn't lacking, I'll admit it wasn't lacking, but I think their video game section, what tourist who's going to come from Japan and be like, oh, thank goodness, I have the Japanese version of a Nintendo Wii, or the US version, the US version of Nintendo Wii. No, they're going to have the Japanese version. So those games, in a sense, are fucking meaningless to them. Maybe handhelds, right? Because I don't know if the 3DS is region locked. I think it is actually, sadly, but I know that the DS, isn't. So if there were DS games there, maybe some Japanese, some European folks coming in, visiting, could have bought stuff there. But really, Toys R Us in general was kind of looked at as more of an attraction. There was like a giant Batman there, a giant Optimus Prime. There was a T-Rex, like from Jurassic Park, that was fucking terrifying. Animatronics, guys. I argue animatronics are scarier than CG, but that's just me. So the point is that there was so much there, kind of more of an attraction than really buying things. Now, of course, there were people at registers, but I would argue I saw more people walking around than I ever did standing at a register waiting to purchase things. Actually, okay, on the second floor, there was a smaller arcade. So I'm sure maybe they made some money there, but if I remember correctly, there were no actual cabinets. So I couldn't go up to that arcade. Actually, wait, there was DDR in the gaming section. So there was or some form of DDR, some kind of like Dance Dance Mix or something like that. So there was, a rhythm game, okay, that you could play. But when we went up to the arcade, I could swear that while there was some cool stuff, there was nothing that was just like, wow, I get to play this fighting game. I'm pretty sure there was none of that. Maybe there was Guitar Hero, but I might also be thinking of a Dave and Buster's that's also in New York as well, or in Manhattan as well. So my point is that it just was not doing well. Right? It wasn't doing well for a bunch of reasons. They shut that down. I looked at that and I was like, oh, I don't know what's next, but this is actually not looking good. And then here we are, right? So I'm part of the culture as a millennial that thought, oh no, but this will be here forever, but then barely shopped at it. Right? Now, Toys R Us is not a mom and pop shop at all. It's not a mom and pop store in any sense of the word. Even now, as they're closing down, it's sad that all these people are going to be losing jobs. But it isn't like a mom and pop. Like, we shouldn't be looking to their video games like, oh no, retro video game stores. They're like, no, I'll say there's still GameStop, but they're not doing so well either, guys. But the point is that, and I've said that so many times during this during this specific rant. But we can't look at a store and look at a service and demand it to be there while not supplying it in some way or building it up in some way or another. So here's a good example, right? People that, and again, I'm not trying to get into this minimum wage thing. I'm only bringing it up because it's what I usually hear when someone says we shouldn't raise the minimum wage for workers who are in fast food. Right? Or like in the fast food industry. We shouldn't raise their minimum wage if even though it's not a minimum wage, a livable wage, it's still minimal enough that, you know what, if they're working 3 jobs, who cares? They don't deserve to be paid more, right? But here's the thing. In the same way that I look at this whole Toys R Us business and these shenanigans, hear me out, guys. If you don't eat at fast food or if you don't care for toys or anything that Toys R Us has to offer, okay, that's fair. I don't know about the Toys R Us thing because you are here listening to this on this channel, but you know what? Okay, to be fair, you might be new to the channel. Hello, nice to meet you, nice to see you. Happy that you've listened this far. You might not be too much into gaming stuff, and that's cool too, right? I'm, again, not trying to say like you have to be into games to listen to this, this Mad Rants. You don't have to be, right? But my whole point is that if you are someone who uses or who says, I want to have, let's say something like Wendy's as an example, right? I want to be able to go to a Wendy's at 2 a.m. and get a burger, right? The amount of times that I've gotten burgers after going to concerts, other kind of events, just hanging out with some people where we get out of a place and think, man, we're hungry, right? If we're looking for that to exist, right, we can't also say, but I'm not going to give money in some way or another for it to exist. And to be fair, when comparing something like Wendy's or other fast food chains, something like Toys R Us, a burger doesn't cost $50, right? A burger can be expensive, but it doesn't cost $50. So neither do the nuggets or the fries or anything else that I love from these different places. I was going to name one, but I was like, I don't want it to be like, oh no, he's being sponsored by them. But the point is that you can't say this has to be a thing. Doesn't matter what it is. If you don't like my example with the minimum wage and with Wendy's and other fast food places, fine, let's throw it away. You can't say, I want there to be more mom and pop stores that can, I don't like big corporations, right? Oh, I don't, and to be fair, Toys R Us is a big corporation, but if you're sitting there, you're like, I don't like the Walmarts, right? I don't like Targets. I don't like Best Buys and all these other places, right? Well, if you don't like them, then you might have to pay a little bit of a premium to get stuff from mom and pop stores, to keep them in business, to keep them afloat, right? Not all of them. Some of them sadly do, but not all of them raise their prices just to fuck you over or just to try to, put more money in their pocket in a greedy way. They do it because they don't have the ability to be a loss leader. And by the way, I actually didn't mention the definition of loss leader. Sorry to some of you guys that have never heard that term before. Hopefully you Google it in the meantime, or you binged it in the meantime. But hear me out though, right? What the word loss leader means, if you didn't do that yet, is it's a company that has the ability, just because they have all that fucking money, to take a loss on stock, whatever the stock is, not stock like in the stock market, stock like whatever items you have in stock. They can take a loss on that, a huge hit on that, technically be in the red for longer than what a new business would be in the red for, which you would think like a new business is in the red for like a year or two, and then maybe things should start going to the green, but it can be heavy in the red. But you know what? They're using their low prices as more of an investment. Like one day we will be able to make money back on this, and then when we do, we'll be the top dogs. We'll be the ones in charge. Sony's actually done this, both with their PS3 and PS4. The parts for their PS3s were so expensive that early on, they, even with all the amount of consoles they sold, with the units they sold, they still didn't have, and even with some of the issues with like yellow rings and, you know, PS2 issues, people brought them back. There was some issue with the PS2 as well, with some really early on like problems with the hardware. But when it comes to the PS3, it was still so expensive that it took them a while for the prices of what they were actually putting into their freaking consoles to go down enough that they were actually able to make a profit. I couldn't do that. Right? If I had the money to make a console, like one of these like retro VGSs or AVSs, I can't think of the names, but like the retro, you know, the new NESs, the new Super Nintendos, no new N64s yet, sadly, but, you know, like the Revo K101, which is a really cool looking Game Boy Advance replica. You have all these different clones, but like good clones, not like, you know, shitty clones. These good clones that are coming out, and you can't have them sit there and be like, oh yeah, it costs us, you know, $300 to make this, but we'll just let it go for $100. No, 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 right? The reason why we're so conditioned in some ways to look at some of the stuff that's being put online by, like, you know, retro video game companies, and we're looking at them and like actual new hardware, and we're like, that's expensive. Why is it so expensive for that? I wouldn't pay that. I'd rather pay this. You do that because we've been conditioned with this kind of loss leader mentality to just assume that everything should be cheaper than what it probably actually is. Right, to make and to put together. Now, if you guys want to disagree with some of that stuff, please do comment below, right? But with so the idea is that when it comes to the whole idea of being a loss leader and stuff like that, and ToysRUs and how that, you know, I mean, earlier on I mentioned how they kind of had to do a little bit of that just to try to compete with Amazon, but you know, it's just the fact that like us as consumers, if we want certain companies or certain businesses to thrive, we do have to. Now, I'm not saying, look, if you can't afford it, then you can't afford it. I'm not telling you to go homeless, right, over some toys. I'm not saying to do that at all. But what I am saying here is that we cannot demand a service without understanding that there are some costs to that service, extra costs that we wouldn't be able to, if we didn't give, you know, if those costs weren't there, then we wouldn't be getting that service. And that's just how it is, right? Where, you know, if YouTube went down, then I would still be able to give you guys podcasts and stuff like that through Blog Talk Radio, but I wouldn't be able to do videos like this. Why? Because I don't have enough money to have my own dedicated server, to have hundreds and hundreds of hours of content. I mean, we currently are nearly at 500 videos. Actually, no, we're over 500 videos on this YouTube channel. That is a lot of content just for us that YouTube is hosting on Those Guys Play right now. So we couldn't just do that on our own. So that's why, despite all the negative things that I might say about certain parts of YouTube, the fact that they exist is pretty awesome. But still, so I can't demand the service if YouTube, you know, has, I mean, it would suck if YouTube said to me, hey, pay $5 a month or something to exist on our platform. That would suck, I'd admit. But when it comes to the ToysRUs argument and that discussion, yeah, we can't just sit here and say, man, I wish ToysRUs existed. Why is ToysRUs going out of business? This is so sad. I can't believe, we can get sad, of course, but the only part of it that we really should, I mean, shit on, like completely shit on ToysRUs for, in my opinion, is when they actually tried to take a shot at their consumer base, which is kind of like, guys, I hope you're not coming back. I wished you were, and I still wish you are, but if you come back now, you're going to have millennials constantly being able to look up the fact that you just bash them. And like I said earlier, people grow. Not so much in terms of growing up, although they do, but people grow, you know, they age is what I'm trying to get at here. They age, everybody. And with aging, you know, sure, you can still call them the millennial generation, but then you'll have other generations underneath them because people age. So when they do have the ability to spend money, it just makes me laugh. Like, just imagining just millennials having all these kids, and then the kids are old enough to go, hey daddy, mommy, I want to go to, you know, the new ToysRUs that's over there, and they're gonna be like, actually son, they shit on all of us and you. Jeffrey the giraffe shit on you, and the kid's face will just be completely horrified. He'll be like, I don't want to go there. So, we're wrapping things up here in this episode of Matt Rants. So, again, the question that was originally asked was, did millennials kill Toys R Us? Yeah, but so did everything else. There's so much else. And frankly, I would argue if Bain Capital didn't buy them out. Although to be fair, if they didn't buy them out, then maybe Toys R Us was doing. I don't actually have the info in front of me where if I know that Toys R Us was doing poorly, maybe they would have been bankrupted earlier. To be fair, but Bain Capital buying them out, saddling them with that debt, and then Toys R Us having to pay the rest of them off as well, like Bain Capital and other firms as well. That didn't help because they literally. It would be like trying to say, "Hey, let's have a race." Right? So, running. Let's use our legs here, guys. Let's run. And, Toys R Us, you're actually going to be on crutches. Even if Toys R Us didn't need crutches. They don't know how to run in crutches. Who can run in crutches? I mean, some people can, but, running in crutches, it's nuts. And then it's like, in Amazon, you're going to start a little bit ahead of everybody else. People are like, what? The race did not, it wasn't fair, right? But it doesn't mean that we, as millennials, should get the full brunt of the blame, because it's just fucking hilarious. Because it's just like, millennials are still buying toys. Like, we have a culture that you can't say, millennials aren't growing up. I'm not saying that the person who said this, I think it was the CEO of Toys R Us. I'm not saying that he personally says this, but you can't say that millennials aren't growing up and they're buying all these toys. And then millennials aren't having enough kids to buy the toys. Yeah, because millennials would come in there and buy their own toys, and then the kids would buy their own toys. No, it's so silly, right? It's very, very silly. But you know what? I mean, I'll say this much. It sucks that Toys R Us is gone. As you can see, the footage that is playing as I'm talking to you guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, the footage that's playing, it's actually Donkey Kong Country. And I still have my copy of Donkey Kong Country. And I still have my Super Nintendo. And I got both of those from Toys R Us. If I remember correctly, I was 5 years old. And my mom got them for me at Toys R Us. If it wasn't, then oh shit. But I'm pretty sure it was Toys R Us. Whoops. I was 5. But I do know that I opened it up at one of the McDonald's near me that I think is still open actually. And so it was my 5th birthday party. And it was a lot of fun, right? Because then I went home and then I started playing video games, and I pretty much haven't stopped playing ever since, really. I put some games down. I've gone back to some games. You've seen me play some of those games on this channel, but I really haven't stopped playing games ever since, funnily enough. A little bit of gaps here and there, but I mean, you draw me back in, video games. You just draw me back in. Anyway, I want to thank you all so much for listening in, for watching this. Please remember to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and if you didn't like the video, then please know that you could still like and subscribe. Comment below with any of your fun Toys R Us stories. There's also talk that KB Toys might be coming back, so maybe some of your fun KB stories. I actually, I have some stuff from Funko Land still. I still have some stuff from Game USA with some stickers on it. So, talk about any of your fun old retro, game store stories. They weren't retro at the time, but now they're retro. And, just thank you all so much for helping us be us. And earlier on, I mentioned our Patreon. It doesn't actually... Okay, so you can give to our Patreon. If you don't, then that's okay. It's not like this is going to be behind a paywall at all. I'm not a big fan of those, paywalls and stuff like that, or Patreons that kind of say, hey, you can only get this. I mean, extra stuff is nice, right? And I'll give you guys extra stuff if you want, through the Patreon. But I don't want to say that this content will be blocked unless you give me money. I'm not a big fan of that. But looking at our Patreon, there's different tiers. So, I mentioned earlier, the whole question and answer thing. You can ask me questions either through our Facebook, which is facebook.com/ThoseGuysOnTheRadio, our Twitter, which is @ThoseGuysRadio, or even in the comment section below, and I'll do either a Matt Rants or just a general Q&A about whatever those questions are. I've done that before with some other YouTubers that have commented on our on our different rants. So I'll do that, right? But if you kind of want it to be a bit more pertinent, a bit more like, no, I want this answered now, or just, you want this Let's Play to happen sooner rather than later, you want the review to happen sooner rather than later, whatever the content might be for Those Guys Play, you can go over our Patreon, which is patreon.com/EDProductions, and you can give money there to certain tiers and basically get that sooner. So I think of it more as either a tip jar or as kind of an express lane, right? Because so much happens on this channel, both in my life and also on this channel. We also have other channels as well, so I do what I like to do when I like to do it. Now, of course, I want to keep you guys happy as well, so if you guys completely shit on one thing and say, no, this is terrible, we don't like this, and no one really says that they do like it, well, then I'll never do it again, right? But vice versa, if a lot of you guys say that you like it, I would try to give it to you, especially sooner rather than later. But again, other outside factors like different tournaments and stuff like that, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, could come into play. But if you guys are basically saying, look, we gave you money for that directly, right? There's no ads on your video. Even if there are ads on the video, some of you guys can be using ad blocker, or, if there's ads on the video and like right now, this current point in time, we don't have any ads on any of our videos because of YouTube's recent demonetization policy, which I mentioned that in another Matt's rant. Why it kind of doesn't affect me, but it's still frustrating regardless. But still, the point is that you guys aren't giving money in that way, and that's totally cool, right? So you're just watching the video straight, and I love you guys for that. And if you guys want to give any more, right, money as well as time, you can go to our Patreon and just kind of tell us, hey, I would like you and Tristan Walter, you and Satish Ram, or even other hosts. You can kind of combine hosts to say, we want you guys to let's play this game or to review this game. Or you can say, we want you guys to talk about your top 5 video games or your top 5 games in this genre or in this franchise or something like that. I mean, jumping over to our podcast, which we have those guys on the radio YouTube channel, and we also have our those guys on the radio Blog Talk Radio account. You can also go to either one, basically to our Patreon and say, hey, I want you guys to talk about your top 5 favorite anime. Or you can say, I want you guys to review this movie or this TV show or this, even this book, technically, or this manga. So, you can say you'd like us to review that. Or you can actually say to us, hey, I want to be a sponsor. Right? So we can give you guys shout outs either during different episodes of Matt Rants or different episodes of those guys play, because we have seasons come out every year. You can also have different episodes of Matt Beats Games for His Childhood, or in terms of the podcast, it could just be at the end of, we have a certain podcast called Keikaku Corner, which Keikaku Corner, we talk about weekly anime, video game, manga news, even tokusatsu news as well. So you can say, hey Matt, I really want you to talk about this piece of news on Keikaku Corner. And if you can of course just ask us in general, but again, more of an express lane, more of a decisive now, you can go to our Patreon and kind of just help us curate what gets talked about on Keikaku Corner. Also, I want to mention that I mentioned our eBay earlier. You can buy different stuff from us on there, like our t-shirts, posters hand-drawn by very own Anthony Sanandris, and some other video games and wrestling stuff for my personal collection, as well as some manga anime stuff. And you can even get some of our t-shirts over at our main website, which is tgproduction.net/merchandise. Also, tgproduction.net is where you can follow all the different stuff that we do on all of our channels, even our TG Productions channel, which on our TG Productions channel, we have a lot of different fun, interesting, weird stuff on there. We're going to have some wrestling reviews in the near future, but right now we just have some funny anime dubs and also some other very interesting dubs and stuff like that. It's weird, all right? Also, we have like Dub Smack, which takes Hong Kong scripts, so basically Hong Kong subtitles that are very broken English, and we just dub that over the anime footage and see how that works. We did one with Yugi versus Kaiba in the Battle City finals, so you can check that out over at TG Productions as well. And just again, thank you all so much. We love you guys. You help us be us. Thank you for everything that you've given to us, and we'll see you next time with another Matt Rants, but we'll give you some stuff before Matt Rants. We actually have 2 episodes. If everything works out well, we have 2 episodes of Those Guys Play Season 4 coming out just this weekend. Thank you all so much. Love you guys. Take care, and see ya.